Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. We're on the second part of our analysis of Travel is So Broadening by Sinclair Lewis. But before we go on, I received some emails from the last analysis, and I just wanted to share some of them with you. It's great to communicate with you. One of them, more than one, said, I took offense at your kike comment, as I'm sure many others did. Why not just cut that comment out? That's a good question. Other people weighed in on it and said basically the same thing. Some people really were really angry and said they'll never listen to me again. And I get it. But actually, what you want to really understand when you're reading classical literature and knowing that the English language changes all the time is that if you don't use what the narrator says, and in this case, don't forget, this is a first-person narrator. Schmaltz is talking. If you change what he says, you're going to change the story. We can show that time over time and again. And once you change one thing, it's like the butterfly effect, we talked about chaos theory several times, you change everything. So you don't want to change original narration. What you want to do is understand it. You want to understand why people use that language, because literature, as I've mentioned over and over again, as Ezra Pound defined it, is language charged with meaning. And I don't know of any words, single words that have charged with meaning except, slang derogatory words like this, like Schmaltz is using. And you're going to find out in this analysis, he uses them everywhere. He's not just one-sided. So if you don't use the words in narration, then you're going to miss something. Also, you got to understand they reveal their character and how they use them. There used to be a saying when I was a kid, sticks and stones can hurt my bones, but names will never hurt me. So we used to say that all the time because when I was a kid, we called each other all sorts of names. And some of the names hurt. Of course they hurt, right? But you get over it. Not only that, when you call a person a name back, it kind of neutralizes the event. It's kind of like, remember I was trying to tell you that language is mathematics? A minus times a minus is a plus. Don't forget that. But when you use words like this in literature or real life, they're revelations of a person's character. A great writer once said, I'm going to read this for a moment. In their novels and stories, writers most often try to choose and present vividly and artistically social types which are extremely seldom encountered in real life, but which are nevertheless more real than real life itself. Dostoevsky, a famous Russian writer, said that, and many of you wrote to me that some of you actually wrote to me you want to punch Schmaltz out. Well, if you recall, the story we understand now, it's in Prohibition. We understand he's narrating to Babbitt what this trip that he took and never made it to Yellowstone. So he's really a blowhard. And you might say, well, Jimmy, why do you read the rest of the story if we already know he's a blowhard? Well, I didn't write the story. Sinclair Lewis wrote it, but Schmaltz is talking about it. And you read what he wrote in order to understand how to lead your life. And I'm sure you met blowhards, so maybe Dostoevsky was wrong. This is not a social type you extremely seldom encounter. Well, I don't know if you meet blowhards all the time, but you certainly have. So there's really no one single answer to the question of why do you use this or don't? But one answer that covers it all is that the author actually creates a narrator and the narrator narrates. And if you really want to understand the story, stay in the story. Don't change the story. Oh, why didn't he use this word? Because it would change it. If he didn't use that derogatory term and just said there was a guy, it would be different. It would be different. So let Schmaltz be Schmaltz. Let the narrators be the narrators. Let people be people. Well, I want to change them. I want everybody to get along. Well, good luck. That ain't going to happen. Besides, you don't have to read anything. You can read what you want, when you want. You can read only what makes you comfortable. But then how do you stretch your imagination? How do you gain knowledge? You don't want to live in a bubble. Self-awareness means constantly testing yourself. There's another theory that, about love and hate. And if you hate something, it's because of whatever you're hating is in you. We don't want to get into that right now, but that's the truth. So, as another great writer wrote, let me conclude with this: you never know what's enough until you know what's more than enough. So you're the best judge of how much of this you want to read with me or don't want to read with me. And quite frankly, I'm producing this and I'm narrating it and I'm analyzing it. So I hope you stick with me, because I'm trying to make literature interesting to you who are, who really don't know how to read or don't want to read. But in any case, thank you for your emails. I really, really appreciate them, including the hateful ones. And let's finish our analysis of Travel is So Broadening by Sinclair Lewis. So we left off, if you look at the top here, with Schmaltz talking about how he bought his shoes. So the fact is, he jewed him. See the word jewed? There it is again. Jewed him down. That's a slang term, right? He brought him down for $3.50, and he's been wearing them for 5 years. Can you imagine that? There's that space again. So something happened there, and I'm going to guess that it's somebody like the Babbitts talking. Now, it's to your auto equipment, George, and then he gets into auto equipment. And he says, here, there's going to be gaps. You're going to need to pull out some other device if you get stuck in a mud hole. When you're motor touring, even though you have perfect cement highways, you're going to get into these gaps. And these gaps are in between the cement, theoretically. So, pardon me, you're going to want chains, extra tires, a stove. You get a little tired of restaurants when you can't, so you want a stove to cook your own food. He's going to talk more about that if you feel inclined to be that way. In most cases, these small towns, you go into a place, well, outside it's got a fine illuminated electric sign with eats or something like that, so you think it's going to be a snappy, up-to-date joint. When you see a word eats on the outside of it, you think it's a snappy, up-to-date joint, but you get in. And here's another revelation of Schmaltz. It's run in by a retired farmer, his daughter, and the old woman. Who talks like that? I wrote a note here. How does this language reveal Schmaltz's character? Ladies and gentlemen, you should be taking notes about Schmaltz's character. This is a revelation. This is a generalization. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So now he comments on that. And he's talking to the Babbitts, right? Mr. and Mrs., and also his wife is with him. Pop's principal job is leaning on the cash register. I'm not going to read all this, but he gets to this certainteed asphalt-treated toast with the relics. He's not liking the food. And then out in the kitchen is Ma doing what she thinks is cooking. I want to say a bad word now, but I'm not going to do it, but I'll lighten it up. What a jerk. Can you imagine if you were listening to a guy like this? What would you do? Would you walk away? I don't know. So here, in all of the place, there's a nice, pleasing odor of burnt steak and onions. There's a lot of sarcasm in Schmaltz's comments. And what is sarcasm? It's the use of irony to mock or convey contempt. He's full of himself, this guy, isn't he? Schmaltz? A nice, pleasing odor of burnt steak and onion. Wow. So here he encounters the daughter, say, can you bring me corned beef hash? And she looks at you like an evangelist, blah, blah, blah. The hash is out. Well, what do you got? Blah, blah, blah. And he ends up, that's, ham and eggs. I think I'll have, but the eggs is all out. God, I've always held and maintained America is the one and only nation that knows how to provide elegant chow. But even a patriot like me, sometimes I feel that we got this said Elegant Chow, every place in the country except three: cities, towns, and farmhouses. Where else is there, ladies and gentlemen? So carry along a little stove. So the stove started here, and then all these words later with the stories is here, carry a stove. And then you ought to have a windshield spotlight and a spade, and you see the dash. Now, look, I want you to look at this. There's parentheses. We studied parentheses in several of our stories. One that comes to mind is Alice in Wonderland, where the narrator would do sidebars and talk to you, and that's what this is. This is first-person narration. We're listening to Schmaltz talk. So what is this? Here, by request of the publishers, are omitted 37 other articles recommended by Mr. Schmaltz, the editor. The editor? This is not Schmaltz's narration. So I wrote a note down here. This is actually a break in the point of view. Someone called the editor breaks in and makes this comment. This should encourage you to investigate what's going on. If you do some detective work, you'll find out that Travel is So Broadening is chapter 5 of Sinclair Lewis's book, The Man Who Knew Coolidge. Now, you don't have to know this. Remember, Jimmy encourages you not to go outside the story. In fact, Jimmy taught this story, over 30 years ago. He used to use this story to teach. And until he decided to analyze it for this series, he never knew it's chapter 5 of The Man Who Knew Coolidge. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is a story in and of itself. Now, if you want to read the whole book, The Man Who Knew Coolidge, you might want to do that. I might want to do that, but I'm not going to do that. Not for this series. For this series, I chose this particular story, which happens to be part of a bigger book, for a reason. I wanted to show you how first-person narrators develop character by just letting them talk, letting them be themselves, and letting you learn about them through what they talk and how they talk and what they talk about. So, it doesn't matter. In this book, you would learn the first name of Schmaltz if you read the book, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, which is not known in this story. We never know Schmaltz's first name. We know his wife's name, Mame, right? And we know George Babbitt's name, but we don't know his name. In the book or in reviews, you'll be able to figure out his name because they tell you what his name is. We don't care. It's Mr. Schmaltz. That's all we really want to worry about. But I wanted to call your attention to this break. And then there's those spaces again. See the spaces? So this is a break in the first-person narration brought into you by this parentheses, which is this third-person omniscient narrator called the editor. If you really want to think about first-person narration, it's really letting us look at the person telling the story from inside the story. Now, who's writing the story? It's the author, but it's really the narrator narrating it. So when Moby Dick, he says, call me Ishmael, Ishmael's going to tell you the whole story. It's always Ishmael. And we're just reading what Ishmael says, recorded by somebody. Somebody. That somebody, you can call it an editor, the author, whatever you want to call it, but it's first person, the characters inside the story. We go back to it, and then the first day, one thing or another, we didn't get out, blah, blah, blah. Exactly 3 minutes after 12, it tells a little bit. We made it only to Miniwak. I never like to go more than 250 miles. We already know that. So I want to, before we go on to the next couple of pages, I want to talk about generalizations. Schmaltz makes a lot of generalizations. Ladies and gentlemen, we all make generalizations. If we didn't make generalizations, we wouldn't be able to surprise. We have to conclude that, for example, a generalization, a car, if it hits you, will injure you or kill you, whatever. Jimmy, that's not a generalization. Well, sure it is. You're generalizing that all cars will do that. But all cars are not created equally, are they? What is a generalization? It's a general statement or concept obtained by inference. You're inferring from specific cases. You see a bird eat worms, then you start concluding all birds eat worms, which is not true. It's just not true. All birds do not eat worms. Some don't like worms. So you can generalize, but you really want to be careful of your generalization. There's also a concept, hasty generalization. See hasty here? Generalizations have you believe that there are no exceptions to that group, whereas there are. So if you make a hasty generalization, you could be wrong. So when you subscribe to any sort of stereotype, and we've seen this guy, Schmaltz, and he judges people and he stereotypes them. You can't stereotype people. When you start doing that, you make a huge mistake. Because again, we're not all created equal. Oh, what do you mean? It says so in the Constitution, all men are created equal. Well, they're created equal, but they're not equal. Some are smarter, some are not, etc. So if you make all people are, let's say a generalization, all people are good. That's a generalization. All people should be treated fairly. They should be. That doesn't mean they are. You see what I'm saying? So when you subscribe to any sort of stereotype, you unconsciously revert to those stereotypes whenever you find face-to-face with one from the group. And that's a mistake because we're all individuals. Each of us are unique. You cannot stereotype. You do, we all do, but you shouldn't. So stereotypes go a way of limiting the experience and benefits you can gain from certain relationships. But we make generalizations about objects to make sense of the world. You wouldn't be able to survive unless you made these generalizations. What you have to be careful about is saying these generalizations are true all the time. Well, Jimmy, what about the sun going around the earth? That's the truth, isn't it? That always happens. I'm not generalizing when I say that, am I? Well, you're not, but in a way, you got to think about it, right? Because it's just not the earth going around the sun. The sun doesn't go around the earth. We talked about this in several other analyses. It really depends on your point of view. I don't want to get into a big philosophical discussion, but when you see something, we want to know what it is and how to react to it, right? So the object of the game is to protect yourself from faulty generalizations. Faulty generalizations are really, really bad, right? As Alexander Pope said, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So you've got to be careful when you pull the judgment trigger. When you pull a judgment trigger, like we're judging Mr. Schmaltz here, right? I've judged this guy already a few pages before to be a blowhard. Mr. Schmaltz is a blowhard. Some people say, no, he's not. I'm just like him. Well, I don't know. If you're in the audience saying you like Schmaltz, send me an email. I want to hear from you. Bill Cosby has a great routine. In the many years ago, where he's smoking a cigar and just talking about all the different people in the world. Put them on an island. Get them out of here. And he ends up putting everybody on an island except himself. It's a great, if you get a chance to do that, if you get a chance to look him up, look it up. So Schmaltz is guilty of more than just faulty generalizations. And when you have such faulty generalizations, you end up to be mean, nasty, and really a jerk. He's a person. And oh, Jimmy, are you saying we shouldn't respect all people? No. You can respect all people, but you don't have to put up with jerks. You don't have to tolerate jerks. This guy's a jerk. He's a jerk. That's Jimmy's opinion. And if you haven't figured that out yet, wait, look. So he says this twice, blah, blah, blah. He didn't have an apple tree on his place. He's talking to farmers. They drove along the road, etc. Blah, 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 blah. We didn't have any special experiences the first day except one or two incidents. Here we go. I remember there was a fellow, he looked like a hobo. Do you know what a hobo is? It's a homeless person, tramp, or vagrant. Look those words up: tramp, vagrant, hobo. Don't forget, this story takes place in the Prohibition. There were a lot of homeless people in the Prohibition because in 29, the market crashed. It was horrible. You think you got it bad nowadays? If you do, when the market crashed, just read about what happened when the market crashed and in these years of the Depression in the United States, actually the world. So he comes across a hobo. He waved his hand and stopped us. I want you to think about this. This is Schmaltz saying that the hobo waved his hand and stopped us. Is that true? Is that true? If you're a hobo, and first of all, he's walking along the street there in the car, he waves his hand and stopped us. So Schmaltz stops and says, "Well, my friend, what do you want?" I says, he was a shabby-looking cuss. "Could you give me a lift?" he says. "A lift? Yeah, I'd like a lift." "You got 2 good feet, haven't you?" says Schmaltz. "Yeah, but I'm going a long ways." "Oh, you are? Look here, my friend. Let me give you a piece of advice. I ain't asking for advice," the hobo says. "I'm asking for a lift. Go hobo, right?" Then, of course, I got a little sore for him sassing me in that uncalled for fashion. Who started the sassing? See what I'm saying about this character? I says, if you haven't got so fresh by now, well, all I can say is if you buckle down the business and tend to business and earn some money, I says, you'd maybe have an auto of your own and you wouldn't have to ask people for a lift. Good day, I says, and I drove on. I guess maybe that taught him a lesson. You buckle down to work and not waste time asking for a lift, I told him, and maybe you'll have an auto of your own. He not only has to repeat it twice to Mr. Babbitt, he's so proud of what he said. And he says it twice for a reason. What does that tell you about this guy? I mean, it's an amazing man, this Schmaltz character, because he's just so full of himself. I remember one time, my wife and I were coming in San Francisco, and at that time, this was years ago, not today. This was years ago, and we had visited there because she had, in her younger days, she had visited and it was beautiful. Let's go back. But it wasn't that beautiful. A lot of homeless people, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember coming off the expressway once, and there was a guy holding up one of the signs with a McDonald's cup. And I said, I'm going to give this guy some money. So I rolled down my window, and the guy's looking at me with vacant eyes, the vacant eyes of either drugs or drink or whatever. And he says, as he's holding on to the pole so he doesn't fall and get hit by cars coming off the expressway, amnesty, amnesty. I gave him a $5 bill, right? And then I pulled over after we got off, and I said, I want to go back and interview that guy. My wife wouldn't let me. In any case, the world is full of very interesting people. Books are full of very interesting people. So here we have Schmaltz with the hobo who stops for the hobo. I had to stop because there was a stoplight at the end of where this guy was hanging out. I didn't stop him. He didn't stop me. He happened to be there. So then we stopped at a little burg called New Paris, and I bumped. This is another incident that's going to reveal this guy. He bumps a little bit into the car ahead of me. That's Schmaltz narrating. I didn't hurt him one bit. I just bent my bumper a little. Bent my bumper. Do you know in the 1920 and 1933, the makeup of automobiles, what they were made of, they didn't they weren't like aluminum. They were built to last, especially when you're driving over rough roads, right? But my God, to hear the other fellow squawk, you thought I, smashed his car to pieces and killed his Aunt Jenny. There he goes with exaggeration again. Great big rube he was, fellow with no dignity. Well, he goes on and the guy comes up, hey, you hit my car. I'm quite aware of the facts, I said coldly. I'm quite aware of the fact, I said coldly, the big bum. As if he thought he could frighten me. So I got out and looked things over and I just bumped his spare tire on the back, just the least little bit. Well, what are you going to do about it? He says. What am I going to do about it? I says. Yeah, what are you going to do about it? Well, inasmuch and considering I haven't perpetrated the least damage. You see what happens to Schmaltz when he's talking to people? He breaks stride. He stops himself from being himself, and he starts using words, big words. Perpetrated, as I haven't done anything. Perpetrated. It strikes me that probably I'm not going to do anything about it. Well, we'll see about it. Well, he certainly will. You can call the officers of the law. Who says the officers? This pompous peacock. So he says, we'll see about that. How does Schmaltz encounter with the hobo tell you? Also, the incident of the car bomb. What kind of impact would cause a fender to bend? Remember this, right? What is the concept of responsibility for your actions? That's the central theme of this incident. Do you take responsibilities for your actions? If you bump a car by mistake, do you leave a note and you just drive away? This Schmaltz guy, he just bumped the guy's quote unquote his, what did he say up here? His spare tire, right? I just, I didn't hurt him. I just a little bit car ahead of me. I bumped the car a little bit ahead of me, but I bent my bumper. That's not a little bit. If you're bending your bumper, you're smacking into the guy, right? Let's continue. I was pulling an awful bluff. There's another character revelation of Schmaltz. He's bluffing. And then he goes on and he says it worked like a charm. The fellow got white. We ought to be more careful, he grumbled. This is a key. What I didn't tell him, and what I didn't feel called on to tell him, is if he couldn't see it himself, was that the way I hit that spare tire, something stuck out, and I smashed the hell out of his valve stem. Here's hell again. He doesn't apologize. Remember he was apologizing for using the word hell? Now he's not. Why? Well, he's been drinking, hasn't he? He doesn't, or this is the true Schmaltz coming out. He smashed his valve stem. So when Mr. Farmer come to put it on, he'd have one fine, awful time and served him right for the way he talked to me. Say, many is the time I've laughed when I thought about that poor hick way off 17 miles from nowhere with a puncture starting to put on this bum tire. Shame on this guy. Shame on it. I do the same thing, Jimmy. Get out of my classroom. Get out of here. I don't want you reading with me anymore. This is horrible. This guy is a horrible person. He's horrible. He gets pleasure in other people's pain. What do you call that? Isn't there a word for that? Let me think. Pleasure from other people's pain. Look it up. There's one word for that. There's one word for that, and that's what Schmaltz is. And then he goes on. They go to a drugstore. They have a couple of things. He stops at a garage. Say, Captain, I hit a mosquito up the road a piece. Look at this guy. And he gets his bumper fixed. And then there's one more little thing. And say, there was one little thing. He keeps going. Then, there's one little thing. I don't know if you ever saw the series Columbo, but Columbo was played by Peter Falk. He was a detective, and he always, one more thing. He'd always go back to the murderer. One more thing. I got it. One more thing. Anyway, he goes to the farmhouse. Here's another incident. This was one of my favorite incidents when I used to teach this story. He stops at a farmhouse for a drink of water. Who does that? Who does that? Not nowadays, but in those days, maybe. I don't think so. Here we find out he owns a store. She was an important customer in my store. I was just as polite if she was a customer in my store. So we learned that Schmaltz owns a store. And he says to her, "Madam, I wonder if my wife and I can trouble you for a drink of water." So if you when we read the story, we find out you're the 16th autoist today that stopped and asked for a drink of water. So apparently everybody's stopping for drinks of water because there's nothing, you're driving in the car, whatever. So she gives Schmaltz a piece of her mind. If you look at this, she's telling Schmaltz exactly what she thinks. The last person she called herself a lady kicked like all to get out because she didn't think that the glass I brought her was clean enough. And all I have to do is cook and bake for 4 men and tend to, blah, blah, blah. She's just saying, blah, 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 blah. Well, there may have been a certain modicum, look up the word modicum, of reason to what she said. I'm telling you, George, I'm all the first to open my heart, blah, 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 blah. Why do these hicks insist on giving themselves away? If you take that, he's really talking about himself, and he's giving himself away through this narration, but he doesn't understand because he's not listening to himself. So what does he do? He says, "I'm very sorry to have bothered you, madam. Good afternoon." And he says, "I was acting like the Beau of Brummel." Well, Beau Brummel was a dandy, English dandy, and a leader in fashion. Not Beau of Brummel. The Beau of Brummel, but it's Beau Brummel. Beau Brummel. George Ryan, Brian, Beau Brummel. Okay. I want to talk 1 second about cruelty, because I think Schmaltz is a cruel guy. It's callous indifference to or pleasure in causing pain and suffering. I think that's what this guy does. He doesn't torture people, but he certainly causes them pain or suffering. He really does. A favorite definition of cruelty comes from a psychologist that says cruelty is the deliberate infliction of physical or psychological pain on other living creatures, sometimes indifferently, but often with delight. What's the worst thing you could do, you think, ladies and gentlemen? What's the worst sin that you could commit? Well, I've thought a lot about this over the years, and I encourage you to think about that. What's the worst thing you can do? Smack somebody, kill, the 10 Commandments, all that? I think one of the worst things you could do is not help someone when they need help. I really do. I think that when you see someone who needs help and you do not help, that's about the worst thing you could do. Now, what are you talking about, Jimmy? You're talking about money? No, I'm not talking about any specific situation, because there's certain things you can't help people with. You just can't. You can't be the conscience of the world. But to me, cruelty, like the incident with Schmaltz, that bumper incident, when he screwed that guy's tire up, Shane, that guy, he will do that. If he didn't look at it, he won't know that the stem was broken and that tire won't work when he goes to put it on. And then he'll remember what happened. And then he'll curse George Schmaltz, whatever. But that's not the point. The point is that Schmaltz knew what he did, but he didn't do anything about it. And he's not a poor guy. He's just a cheapskate. A very, very cheap fellow. Anyway, so this guy is, the more I read this, the more I hate the guy. Let's finish this story up. Here's a couple of points. They stay at a motor. They stay on an auto camp rather than going to the hotel. His wife wants to go to a hotel, but he wants to save a few bucks. So he's a cheapskate. he's not a poor guy. He owns a store. He's got a car, right? This guy is not suffering like many people were suffering in this time when this story takes place, which is during Prohibition. There were many people suffering, and suffering is suffering. It's not a good thing. So you can tell from this, I'm not going to belabor this because we're already pretty far along. So we settle down, and then he tells his wife, Mame, let's make out like we're just tourists. Well, what are they? Without a bean to our names. Bean, without a bean. And she entered right into the spirit of the thing, and we bought a frying pan, a stew pan at the store, some stuff. We had a dandy little supper cooked by Mame's old fair hands. What did they eat? Canned vegetable soup, canned weenies. Hey, did you ever know weenies are named after Wien, the German city? Fried potatoes, and on top of it all, a chocolate almond bars. Wow. 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 So then they get around the campfire with other people and they start singing songs, which are very interesting. These are old songs. See, he says they're the old. I like these old songs, not these new things. After the ball, Daisy, Daisy, give me an answer true. You know, these are very old songs, 1800s, 1892, etc. And then he learned, as he's talking to these people around, he learns things that he never knew. I learned that Zion City, Illinois, or maybe it's Wisconsin. These are some clues to the songs. I wrote you a little note here. They were done in the 1890s, etc., around before 1900, and this story is 1920, 33, sometime in there. So he liked the older songs, whatever that means. And then there's this adjective that's used here, a definition of stuck-up, adjective, used colloquially, overly arrogant, synonyms, big-headed, finicky, snooty, snotty. He was a snot, wasn't he? And then the end of the story, where Dr. Lapewski, his name was, there was a guy at the camp, and he was driving in Oakland. In Oakland, what is in Oakland? In Oakland is a car that was made by GM. In 1909 and 1931, the brand was dropped and became Pontiac. So Oakland was, pretty good car. So there's a guy named Lapewski there, and he goes, I was interested in him right away, and I said to him, he's saying he mentioned that I came from Zenith, and Lapewski said that he happened to run into a gentleman from Zenith in a hotel. So that gets Schmaltz's attention. What was the name of this guy? And Lapewski says, Claude Bundy. He said he was in the sash and blind business. Do you know him? Listen to Schmaltz's reply. According to Schmaltz, well, sir, I said to the doctor, can you beat that? It's a pretty doggone small world after all. No, I don't know Claude. But several times I met his cousin, Victor Bundy, the lawyer. And I imagine I know several people who've known Claude. And that's how it went. He doesn't know Claude, but he knows Victor. I don't know. So it's 11:15. They should be getting home. And he goes, oh, one more thing. There's the Columbo again. I must say before we skip, be sure to carry along a drinking cup. And then he ends up by saying what kind of green, blah, 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 blah. Okay. What nationality is Schmaltz? Have you figured that out yet? Look it up. Just ask Google. Schmaltz is a German surname. German. And you can tell from the story, remember when he was talking about as many Swedes as Germans, right? So he's German. Now, if you know anything about the 20s and 30s and the 40s with World War II in Germany, not that I'm generalizing. I'm not saying this about all Germans, ladies and gentlemen, but he's a German, okay? And you never learn anything by talking was something Jimmy heard from one of his clients years ago. Think about that. You never learn anything by talking. What you do is you learn a lot by listening or by reading, because reading is, in fact, listening, right? So he was told that because salespeople usually always talk. That's my client, right? You should learn things to listen. So this story gives us an unbelievable experience of listening to one person talk and talk and talk and talk. Through his talking, Schmaltz reveals just exactly who he is. Exactly. When you finish this story, there should be no doubt in your mind what kind of guy this is, who this guy is. He's got airs up his whatever. In the study of literature and in some of the books you've been reading with me, we've learned that who you are is very important. It's not only important for people in stories, but for us as individuals, as a human being. And when you read a story like this about a guy like this, Schmaltz, maybe if you read it, there's, you're going to say, oh, I want to pop, like I got some emails. I want to pop this guy, right? Or maybe you say, if you say, am I like that? If you say that, am I like that? Then I can tell you the value of literature is hitting you right where it's hitting you. Because in a very, very profound way, we're all like Mr. Schmaltz. No, we're not, Jimmy. You can't say that. I'm not like that. I'm not like that. Well, maybe you're not. We were at an event the other day, and this lady approached my wife and I during intermission, and it was a dance thing going on with professional dancers. It wasn't to my taste, but that's okay. De gustibus nanis disputatum. You can't argue about taste, right? So we were just standing there, and this lady walked up and starts talking, asking where my wife is from. And then they have a conversation, and they hit on the topic of Italy. And this lady goes, my heart, I'm from Minnesota, but my heart is in Italy. And it was interesting because she was dressed very nicely, whatever. I'm not going to get into all the details, but we judge people by how they're dressed, by what they say, don't we? We always do. And I was listening because I'm the one who elicited. I asked, where are you from? Minnesota, but my heart's in Italy. Because they started talking in Italian to each other. And when they start doing that, my wife's Italian, I said, that's my cue to leave. And the lady goes, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, no. My wife says, no, he's always like that when I talk Italian because he doesn't understand Italian. Little does she know. In any case, they talked a little bit more. And I said, where are you from? And I told her where I'm from. Oh, you're from, and the dancers, the group was actually from the same city that I was from. Then, oh, so you must have seen them, when you lived there. I go, no, I never heard of them until I got here. Aren't they great? Aren't they just fantastic? And I said in this tone, they're okay. And she turned around and walked away. Just without saying another word, she turned around and walked away. And I looked at my wife and I said, what did I say? I said, they're okay. They're not terrific. That's a different word, right? We're all like Mr. Schmaltz in a way. I'm sorry I offended her, but I'm not, because I don't care. But what you have to understand about stories like this is that you won't get a chance, maybe you will, to meet a true blowhard. But and I'm not saying this lady was a blowhard. I'm saying she was a snob. But I'm not saying, and there's nothing wrong with being a snob. If you're a snob, that's okay. Who cares? But when you encounter people, especially in literature, it's important to understand them. And you can't do that by generalizing or going outside the story. You got to look at the evidence of the story. And the evidence is clear here. Mr. Schmaltz is a schmuck. It's just, he's not a nice guy. He's a cruel guy, bit of a masochist, a blowhard. People, and is, I don't want to spend no time. This is enough with this guy to spend the rest of my life with that. So, what do you think Schmaltz thinks of himself? I think he thinks he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Does he realize what people think of him? I don't think so, because people like Schmaltz never look at what other people think of them. They only look about what they think of other people. And there's a danger in just doing that one way. You gotta understand what you do, how you do it. When Jimmy was in business, he never went anywhere. Some people said he slept with a tie, and I didn't, but I do. I wore a tie all the time because I was taught that. You dress for success, right? Would you want this guy as your neighbor? Would you want Schmaltz as your neighbor? Well, if you did, you wouldn't talk. Would you talk to him more than once? Do you have this guy as your neighbor? So happy to meet you. You've been reading with Jimmy. This is the analysis of Sinclair Lewis's Travel is So Broadening. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. I certainly enjoyed reading it, analyzing it, and hope you come back for more. Here's my email, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Hope to see you soon for the next book or short story. Thanks very much.